Hi, I'm Matt the Comic Guy. Iceberg charts. The whole iceberg chart thing is whole explanation. And very interesting as well. Today is all about the entries in the iceberg. And how much of a high chance or a low chance do they have of actually happening? When it comes to iceberg charts, many of them explain about information that's true, that's actually true, and actually gets to the point. When some of them are not true by entry point. Some of them just explain about certain things, about certain character that not many people know about. Others people do know about, but not so much of every person who actually knows the character. And today I want to analyze icebergs and see what level they have of the information of the character. That's right, today I'm doing information of comic book characters and see what they're going on. And see what level they have and what type of people could know about them. From the most likely, could it be almost every person should know about them, to the smallest, where it makes sense that a certain amount of people would get a certain amount of and not want to know or not want to pretend it's not there. This is my first episode of this series, starting with Spider-Man. Let's start with the most likely to make sense of almost every person who knows about Spidey to want to know the information. His origins has already been done. Not joking. And this is actually true though. His origins have already been done. Many people who recognize the character, I mean many, not most, not almost all, a lot of people already recognize that his origin of a couple other characters has already been done. It's been done twice in the movies, done many times on certain occasions on his other on-screen appearance. It's also been done many times before in several comic iterations. Not every version of him is Peter Parker. That's true. Just like many other characters, he has multiple, yet many different iterations. But not every version of him is Peter Parker. Some were straight up, he's not a single point in being there. Either some other things that happen in the stories or something like that, or it is entirely someone else who's Spider-Man. The Ultimate Universe, for example, for a obvious yet more famous example, through the 160th issue, it was Peter Parker. However, this version Peter Parker dies and replaced by someone who was called Miles Morales. In another universe, we have Spider-Gwen, who, you guessed it, is Gwen Stacy. Oftentimes nicknamed Ghost Spider. Not confused with the other Ghost Spider. Then there's the 2099 universe, where Peter Parker's not really around, and we have someone named Miguel O'Hara. strange, right? Yes, it is strange. However, all the rest of the universe does have Spider-Man who's Peter Parker. The Spidey name. Spidey. Yes. So, little soap story. Spidey is just a nickname for Spider-Man. He's often have another nickname called Webhead. The multiple names of Spider-Man's different series. This refers to that Spider-Man standalone series has multiple series and thus multiple names for them. His first solo series was just the Amazing Spider-Man. But there's one just called Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spider-Man, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and so on and so on. The explanation for his parents. Peter Parker's parents, aka Spider-Man, easily had been explained in a lot of his continuities to have passed away in a plane crash. What they were not entirely much explained until one issue where they turned out to be spies. Wasn't explained what actually happened to them until many years later in one issue of the 90s. Ever since then, that's been the explanation of what happened. With great power comes great responsibility. The line Spider-Man gets after he knows what he has done to notice that that's not what his Uncle Ben has wanted. In the movies, yes, it has been. In the adaptations, yes, it has been said by his Uncle Ben. But in his debut issue, hasn't been said by any character, just a narrator, by saying the finish line, with great power comes great responsibility. The ironic thing behind another one of the people that was made by Spider-Man, of another character. Yeah, the odd thing about Spider-Man and Doctor Strange is that they both use their powers by the same hand gesture. Spider-Man for shooting his webs, and Doctor Strange for using his spells. And the explanation is that they were both done by Steve Ditko. Steve really had the idea of making his comics where a character will use their hands for some emotions. The interesting explanation of how Stan Lee came up with the idea. You probably know the story. Stan Lee somehow saw a fly crawling up this wall, and he came up with the idea of coming up with Spider-Man. However, the person that he was working with at the time thought it was a ridiculous idea, and says, people don't like spiders, and you want to make it a teenager? Stan, teenagers are sidekicks. Of course, he proved him right when he made the character, of course. I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man catchphrase. The phrase that he says, I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, well, is an idea it's a catchphrase of his. Easily to explain it is that he is sort of a friendly neighborhood hero, protector of the city, and that's his name. So thus calling himself I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. The Mr. Getting Me Pictures of Spider-Man, J. Jonah Jameson, and his whole thing about not liking the guy. J. Jonah Jameson is a character that appeared many years ago in the comics, first appearing as his first issue of his own series. And since then, in every other comic and every other appearance of him, he never liked the Spider-Man. He had different reasons in other versions of him, but when it comes to that, it explains, that he never liked the guy, seen him as a menace, which of course he would. He's a vigilante after all. But oftentimes, there's not always been an appearance of J. Joe Jameson, so we don't always have to rely when he appears. The differences between the evilness between Venom and Carnage. Very self-explanatory. Venom's evilness is that he wants to have revenge on Spider-Man. Carnage is fact evil because he's a little psycho. Yeah, that explains their difference. We are Venom. Yes, we are Venom is Venom's catchphrase. When he says it, it explains that he's both the symbiote and the host itself. He explains that it's two minds working together. And that's why he says, we are Venom. Another differences between him and Carnage. Carnage is entirely the character who's bonded with the host. Venom is bonded to the host, but explain two minds. So you have to say it like you confirm what that is, we are Venom.
Venom. Sorry.
Speaking of which, the symbiote suit itself. Yeah, the whole symbiote thing started with back in Battle World and one of the Secret Wars issues. When he bonded to it, it did almost corrupted him, but since then he had never wear the suit ever since, except for maybe certain adaptations at certain points in the comics. But that was either different universes where it takes it, or what it was points in the comics where it happened, but not as often. Okay, next. This whole Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage is Ben Riley, aka the Scarlet Spider, when he gets bonded with the Carnage symbiote. And originally when the idea started, they came up with an idea with Spider-Man himself, but used the Carnage symbiote, but only in alternate universe. When it came to the comics, since Peter Parker wasn't Spider-Man at the time, they had to use it on his clone instead. Whole man spider thing. Another point where Spider-Man is becoming some kind of monster. In this case, an actual spider. This happened many times. First in the animated series, but then when it happened in the comics, that was constant. Outside the symbiote, this is one of the cases where Spider-Man wasn't in control of himself. Spider-Man's villains and their similarities with Batman's villains. Yes, a lot of Batman and Spider-Man villains are similar to each other. Green Goblin is obviously his version of Joker. There's Lizard, who basically DC decided to came up with the idea of Killer Croc. Black Cat is basically his version of Catwoman, and so on and so on. The first, the prototype mask used in the first movie for the Green Goblin. You don't know, well, not all of you know, watching this video know, Green Goblin in the first movie does have a different look compared to the comics. However, there was a prototype mask, so when you want to see the first movie where he looks like his comic book self, this is the closest thing you're gonna get. As well as concept art. However, the thing didn't work for obvious reasons, and so they decided to change it and kept on with the movie design we have in the first movie when it was finalized. Thus, not giving the idea for the concept art, and thus giving us what we have for the actual first movie. Now, the nickname Spider-Man's Marvel team-up issues. The Marvel team-up issues often used to have Spider-Man as when he crossed over with other heroes. Basically, it was the comics way of explaining Spider-Man can use the other Marvel heroes and thus Marvel team-ups. The Spider-Man first video game commercial. Spider-Man's first video game was in 1982, and it had a commercial with people in costumes as both Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. Yes, it was Spider-Man playing his own video game, and the Green Goblin was there. Now, Doug Walker already explained about this commercial, but he was kind of confused of the thing where he was pointing at the game, and he said you're running out of fluid. Yeah, he was kind of confused of what he was talking about. Don't worry, Doug. The line is, you're running out of fluid. Yes, he said it so weirdly that it's understandable that Doug Walker got confused a little, because it's not clear of what sounds like. It sounds so weird that you're not gonna be clearly gonna hear it. That's because that was an old commercial, like years ago. Because it was from somewhere in the 80s, it's hard to tell what you can actually hear. Nowadays, you don't have that problem where you have to re-watch the commercial and understand what someone was saying. Now, on to the other important parts. Iron Spider. Iron Spider refers to in the time in Civil War where Spider-Man had to wear the armored suit. And the whole thing was an explanation that can be save for a few other entries on this list. Spider The Spider-Man clone saga. The whole Spider-Man clone saga was a bit of a mess, and kind of the whole thing about the Marvel comics. However, it did officially end after like a few years and many issues. Linkara. Linkara is the one with the famous I'm a man type of phrase in it, in his other videos. But he also did cover Spider-Man comics. He did certain ones. His first actual video was a Spider-Man comic dealing with the once ongoing clone saga. Jacko. The Jacko is a villain of Spider-Man's that's not so as known as the other ones, but he was a character that was commonly noticed in the Clone Saga.
Who was the clone?
Alright. Spider-Man's clone, Ben Riley. Ben Riley, aka the Scarlet Spider, already formerly mentioned him as being bonded with becoming Spider Carnage. However, the clone is a whole different thing. The clone, aka Ben Riley, aka Scarlet Spider, was one of those characters that was constantly being used in other stories. The aforementioned Clone Saga as the example. Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is Spider-Man, but Doc Ock's controlling his mind. This happened in an instance at the end of Amazing Spider-Man number 700. It lasted for a while up until the end of the Superior Spider-Man series. Thus, it never happened again for like forever. Spider-Hulk. Basically, it's Spider-Man, but with Hulk's powers. Basically, there was instance of this cover Spider-Hulk. It first appeared in the issue of 11 Spider-Man, but since has been so familiar in comics that it got itself its own toy line. Yes, a toy of Spider-Man as the Hulk. Yes, that's weird. But interesting, but also weird. Now, let's get on to interesting stuff. Spider-Man's appearances and other shows and movies. Spider-Man has made appearances in other shows and movies. This happened constantly originally in the 80s, but it also happened later on in other pieces of media with Spider-Man. Usually in those Marvel animated shows that started with Ultimate Spider-Man. They hyphenated in Spider-Man's name. Please put self-explanatory. Spider-Man's name had to be hyphenated so you won't be confused with Superman. Thus, when you say Spider-Man, you always have to remember that hyphenated part of it. Lost or canceled projects. There's been many canceled or lost projects that have been lost. There's also been several times where they've been found, but not much. Universes of Spider-Man. Like I said, there's been multiple universes of Spider-Man. Examples being several animated or on-screen versions of himself. Several ones from the comics where it was a what if, or in reality where it's been going on for a while. Or happened only one time, and it was one or two issues. Several stories where it can be considered a separate character, like Spider-Man Noir. It's a different type of thing, and I might do it in another video or might give any other examples, but I don't have to. I can say you can have enough research to see the different universe where there was a Spider-Man. A lot of video games. Spider-Man, just like many other characters, have also had not just adapted from the screen, but also video game form. Ones with many different consoles. Some were adaptations of other stories in the comics, others were their own story, some were the adaptations of the movies. The Insomniac Spider-Man games, speaking of which, the Insomniac games were the latest Spider-Man games, in the history of Spider-Man. They basically were the first game in its sequel, the upcoming third with a couple of parts split in half of it, as well as Spider-Man Miles Morales. The many characters that are unknown or unclear what they are. Spider-Man has many characters. As such, not every character will be known or recognized of who they are as characters. Some may have not been known, or you might not have seen as much other than certain stories of the character. Characters strictly made for the adaptations. There's been many adaptations and many ideas strictly made for the adaptations. There's been many Spider-Man characters in the adaptations, but they weren't made for the comics. They were strictly originally made for other things. This happens with comic book characters when they get adaptation. They made characters up for that adaptation. Spider-Man's full name. Spider-Man's full name is Peter B. Parker. The B, I can't explain what that means, but yes, Spider-Man's full name is Peter B. Parker. Spider-Man and his explanation of his age. Spider-Man is usually a teenager, but there has been times where he's gotten older in the comics and has gotten older before. Many pieces of media. But oftentimes he is a teen, so yeah. One More Day. One More Day is where is a not so well made storyline in the comics where he has one more day according to the title of that story with Mary Jane. In order to save his Aunt May's life, he had to make deals with the devil to erase his marriage. Yeah, not so well made story. And it was made by someone who was called JMS. JMS will explain a little bit later. Spider the Spider-Man drug issues. The issues of Spider-Man of his own standalone series of 96 to 98 were basically trying to warn people about the dangers of what happens when you take drugs. See, the explanation of this is that Stan Lee wanted to make issues about this. He wanted to make this a whole famous story, but Comics Code wouldn't allow it. However, when it was published the first time ever in years without the seal of approval. So yeah, interesting story about this. You might find it interesting yourself. But Spider-Man's in his past. JMS One More Day wasn't the only not so well made story he made. It's also Spider-Man Sin's Past. I leave you the details in saying it's not so well made story, and it's very much has the wrong ideas of what's happened in the story. So I just leave it at that, and you just figure out the rest. Just a few more things to go, and we'll be done. James Cameron's Spider-Man. James Cameron's Spider-Man was an idea that was supposed to be a little different. Supposed to be the idea that JMS was supposed to have, but never completed. It was a scrap movie, but the idea of him having organic webs continued on by the actual first theatrical movie of his. The Trouble series, another not so well made series of Spider-Man. Yes, this is whole Spider-Man thing. Basically, it's a whole story of trying to explain the explanation of Aunt May and Uncle Ben and his parents. And it's odd. Like, really odd. I will give a link down below to Lynn Carr's video if you want to watch it. Very interesting, and very interesting the idea and how much you would be surprised to figure out what the story is. Anyway, let's end with something better. Let's end with something that's quite a mystery. Well, not really a mystery. The Spider-Man Noir new series. Yes, it's been announced that there's been a whole TV series of Spider-Man Noir. and it's very interesting. Anyways, I'm at the Comic God. That's it for now. See you next time. Bye.